Hello, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday to all our DIA members and non-members who may watch these videos as well. I'm just doing a quick update for you all, what is becoming a weekly update now on not just driver testing and driving test waiting times today, but other matters that will be concerning some of our members north of the border. And that's the PBG scheme, which AGIs have been told last week they have to be compliant with as an extra layer of disclosure in their licensing process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this update on driving test waiting times first. And then if you're not interested in what's happening north of the border and it doesn't affect you, you can close this video down. Those of you who are affected by this, stay on the video to the end because I'm going to just briefly go through that PBG registration process with you and answer some of your questions and concerns about that announcement. So starting off with something that affects all of you. Yesterday, we had a meeting with DVSA to discuss driving test waiting times. This meeting was a result of us writing as the National Association Strategic Partnership to Loveday Rider over 2 weeks ago now, expressing the concerns of the industry at the continuing Groundhog Day situation of driving test waiting times seemingly going nowhere in terms of a downward trend. And as we summarised in that letter, we've got to a worse situation with testing than we were at immediately after lockdown ended, because we've gone from a 15-week waiting time as of kind of October 2021, and we're now in May 2025, and we're at a 22-week waiting time across the UK as an average. So that average means that some test centres will have more availability, so the picture is better, but actually, sadly, that average also means that some driving test centres in the UK will actually have a worst case scenario than 22 weeks. So we had written over 2 weeks ago to the Chief Executive of DVSA. We feel that we give in 2 weeks, even taking into account the Easter holidays, was a long enough time to at least send an email acknowledging the letter, because it was sent under the subject matter, reflecting an industry's concern. You and I and others all might have different attitudes to how they sift through emails and how they respond them. I personally would have responded to an email like that a lot sooner. I was working during the Easter holidays. I would have picked that one up and responded to it. However, I understand the busy remit of the Chief Executive of the Driving Vehicle Standards Agency, and they were also on holiday, so they feel that they didn't have time to respond previously. However, we felt as an organisation, and my colleagues in NAS did, it was time to escalate that letter. Not just because we didn't have a response at that moment 2 weeks after we'd written, it was actually because we feel it's important that ministers and other stakeholders are aware of the issues as well. This is not running to teacher to tell on someone else. This is everybody who is making a decision in this process and has the power to expedite solutions should know what the industry who is at the coalface of all these problems really feels about those problems. So we escalated that letter last week to Heidi Alexander, the Secretary of State for Transport, to Lillian Greenwood, the Undersecretary of State, who is responsible specifically for DVSA and the areas of driver testing and licensing and training. And we also sent that to the Transport Select Committee, who you will remember that I gave evidence to in December when they were looking into the issue of test waiting times. So we wanted to give them an update as well, that the problems we were discussing in December have not been made better by the measures that DVSA have brought in the interim period. Lo and behold, we escalate the letter up and we get a response from DVSA, who, to be fair to them, arranged a meeting rapidly for us to have a face-to-face to discuss these issues. So what we're doing now is we discussed a lot of questions and concerns that you have been raising, not just those that you'll see published in the letter. There were obviously additional questions and concerns to what we covered in the letter. Plus, last week, as government has a want to do, they announced a raft of new measures in the Easter holidays to try and tackle these waiting times. So in a way, that is admitting that the 7-point plan isn't necessarily doing its job if you've got to bring in extra measures. However, I'm not going to criticise somebody bringing out further solutions. too hard. However, we wanted to know what the meat on the bones of those additional measures. So Heidi Alexander put out a press release last week, and the Department for Transport detailing that in addition to the 7-point plan, they would also be doing things like asking for volunteers from non-frontline personnel who hold warrant cards to come back to the front line. So this is different from last time when more or less 230, 240 personnel were kind of told to go back to the front line to try and deal with the backlog. On this occasion, they're only asking for volunteers. They're not press ganging anybody directly into doing that role. So the hope is they will get enough people with the goodwill to actually go back to frontline testing, either a full-time or a part-time capacity. They're also offering an overtime incentive for people to do that, and an overtime incentive for examiners to do more overtime to increase test capacity as well. And one of the other things that she announced last week was expediting the results of the call for evidence and the consultation on the call for evidence that is looking into things like can other measures like test swaps be looked at as a way of dealing with the backlog. And if you stop things like test swapping, is that going to have a massive detrimental impact in another manner? It might stop the bots getting into the system and being able to monkey around in there, but it also might cause a major problem for genuine ADI businesses as well, because it's seen as a benefit to be able to swap pupils around in the system. And that consultation is also looking at other issues with the booking system and the booking processes as well. And unfortunately, because of the processes at hand here, they do have to wait for the results of that consultation before they can implement further policy change. However, our letter was seen as positive in one sense, in that ministers being exactly aware of the extreme concern and frustration of driving instructors about the continuing test waiting times. They can try and expedite that consultation now because they know it needs to happen faster. We need to have answers faster to how these things could impact driving instruction and also testing. And so there is that will to hurry up this consultation as well. Because as well, one of the things we were saying is a criticism of your 7-point plan is 25% of it, a quarter of it is plans to consult on plans and policy changes, and that's not an immediate plan. Neither is the Ready to Pass campaign being an element of that plan either. It's too slow burn thing to be in what we would see as a crisis management plan. So we spoke about Heidi Alexander's and the DFT's announcement on those extra measures. We spoke about the 7-point plan and why after nearly 5 months of implementation now, we don't seem to be getting a better result from that. And we spoke about other questions that you had on the whole issue of driving test waiting time, and not just questions. There's also a lot of suggestions from the community of driver trainers as to what they feel DVSA have not tried yet or should try doing again, i.e. returning personnel to the front line so they've got more testing capacity. So all these things. So this was our list of questions that we turned up to the meeting with yesterday. We are now sending that to DVSA. They gave us some answers yesterday. However, what we want them to do is actually put those answers down in a way that we can share them with members. Some information yesterday was confidential discussions about things that have not been approved at a higher government level yet, so we're not able to release that information. And some information is still in the formulation stage in terms of things that they're looking to and trying to do and consulting on. However, we have asked them to flesh out as many answers to the questions as they can at the moment. And one of the major things that we fed back yesterday was the lack of communication on progress of things like the 7-point plan, the lack of communication that they understand what it's like out there for you as a driving instructor, that vacuum, that silence on some of the things you'd expect them to be communicating on is part of the problem, is contributing to the problem. So people don't feel so frustrated, was our feedback, if they are not kept in the dark. And there is a feeling that we're kept in the dark to some degree at the moment, and that the fairly harsh criticism of DVSA is that you are pushing things out that you want to get out there that make you look like you're doing something, and also some things that are a bit jam tomorrow. They're not the bread today answers that people want right now about testing. They're talking about other things they're trialing and other projects they're working on, when really, if you're looking for an update, you're looking for an update on these topics, not the stuff that is nice for you to tell us about. So we had a number of the senior management team on that call, and we had a good, frank chat about the issues at hand, but also the issue of communication being quite poor at a time that, as an agency, you have to have your ear to the ground more than you have done previously, and you also need to be seen to be communicating a lot more than you are doing. Having one-on-one meetings with stakeholders like a driving school franchise about the 7-point plan, one single franchise, or going to an expo, or going to a young driver a discussion event in London with a load of road safety officers is not necessarily the job of communication that I would expect a senior management team dealing with this issue to be focused on at the moment. I would say that get on something like a video like we're doing at the moment, and broadcast a little bit more about what measures are being taken to tackle the issues and also what impact they're having. So hopefully that feedback was taken on board, that they were telling us there was some progress yesterday, but our point of view that we fed back is, but that's not coming out of you as a communication. We've had to come and ask you what the progress is. If there really is genuine progress, why wouldn't you want to come and tell us about that progress? And why aren't you keeping us updated on that 7-point plan? No wonder people are peed off with you if they're not getting any communication on this progress and not actually seeing it out there as well. So whilst people might not be seeing that progress right now, if you could at least give people the hope that there are positive moves forward with driver testing, people will be a little bit less pissed off, quite frankly, out there as well. Okay, so hopefully next week, I'm sending all these questions off to them today, and also including some other ones that we've had as a thing. You get into a discussion in these meetings, and sometimes it gives you more questions than it does answers. But we'll be sending off this list to them today, and obviously we have to give them a grace period to be able to get all the answers that they can give us at this time to those questions. So as soon as we've got this set of FAQs completed with as many answers as we can and more meat on the bones of some of these things, I will share those with our membership, and other NAS members will do that as well. So that's that. The second thing that I was going to talk to you about today is the PVG scheme. So you will have received an email on the 30th of April, I think it is, telling you that if you are an ADI north of the border in Scotland, you have to do fundamentally an extra layer of disclosure when you do your and become a member of Disclosure Scotland's PVG scheme. Now, the PVG scheme is the Protected Vulnerable Groups scheme, and it's that extra layer of compliance that's required of roles in Scotland that work closely with children and protected adults. Now, and a protected adult is, as I'll speak about later on, is a defined issue in itself, because it talks about people who are vulnerable, but their vulnerability might be different in certain settings. So if you are an ADI in Scotland, you have been told now that you have to become a member of this PVG scheme, because you have a role that is deemed will take you into contact with children and young adults who may be vulnerable. And what you have to do to become compliant with this scheme is go to the PVG Scotland website and register for the scheme. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now so you can actually see the website, and hopefully you should be able to see that on the screen right now. So what you have to do is be compliant with the scheme, and you have to be compliant by the 30th of June. So the announcement that went out is that on the 1st of April, Scottish Government has decided that driving instructors also have to be compliant with this scheme, and you've got till the 30th of June to actually register the scheme. I have had some feedback from members who are confused, because when they, in all good conscience, have been to register with this scheme, they can't see driving instructors listed on this website as one of the professions that has to be compliant with the scheme. That's caused confusion for some, and in others, they are, saying, well, hang on, if it doesn't clearly and explicitly say on the Gateway website I'm supposed to register by, and when I use the checker on the website, it doesn't explicitly state approved driving instructors have to be part of this scheme, why should I pay the 50 odd pounds that is also required of me and actually spend the time registering with this scheme? So yes, I agree with you. It's not explicit when you actually go through the process that driving instructors are having to be compliant with the scheme. All you've had so far is an email from DVSA telling that you should be compliant with the scheme. My recommendation is you should follow through and become compliant with this scheme. But what I did do yesterday was I took the journey myself of going through registration for this scheme. And having gone through that journey, I also rang Disclosure Scotland to point out that if they want majority compliance, they are going to need to put on the list of regulated professions that's on this website, approved driving instructors, because you could be curmudgeonly about this and say, ADIs are not expressly listed here. And if I go through your gateway checker to see whether I should register the scheme, I can actually say no to nearly every single question. And that brings out a result that I don't need to be part of this scheme. So if I just do that with you now, so if you go to this mygov.scotland, the PBG scheme, you can just type into Google PBG scheme. If you click on the roles that need PBG membership, it will give you a list of the type of roles. It will broadly describe them as it shows you here. Examples include teachers, social workers, and sports coaches. Okay, you could say, well, it's pretty much clear there that a driving instructor is some kind of trainer in the same sense as a teacher or a sports coach. So I would imagine that ADI should have to register for this scheme. But again, being curmudgeonly, you might say, yes, but it should be expressly listed that driving instructors should be covered for this scheme. However, you can check if your role should, and this is where the issue is occurring, and this is what I've reported up to Disclosure Scotland, they need to change. You can use our handy tool to check if a role needs PBG scheme membership. So let's click on that and let's go through checking whether I am a role that needs PBG. So once you've gone through to this page, you can check if a role needs to be covered by this scheme. Is the role covered out in Scotland? Yes, I am an ADI and I work in Scotland. So I'm going to tick yes for that. Is the role on the list of regulated roles? Okay, handy. Actually, they've got a list here that I can click, opens in a new tab. So I look down that list and I see care, education, health, sport, and other. Rationally, we're obviously going to, if we can't see driver training explicitly listed, we're going to click the education button and expect that we're going to be in there, because we're not in care, we're not in health, we're not in sport, we might be in other. We'll take a look at that in a moment. Actually, if you look here, a driving instructor is not included in the education category. Okay, so rationally, we're now going to go to other and expect to see ourselves here. This list is not exhausted. Okay, they put a caveat on it. You'll still need to have contact with children or protected role if you meet the criteria for a regulated role. A regulated role, contact with children or protected adults, could be a charity trustee, a social worker, elected members, student training profession, a chief education officer, but nowhere on there is driving instructor. That would be the place that I would have put driving instructors explicitly if you're now telling them that they have to be compliant and you're going to enforce on that. So this was the opportunity, Disclosure Scotland, to put driving instructors on the list. If you're going to send out a notice that says you have to be compliant by the 30th of June, you also should be compliant in terms of providing that communication clearly and accessibly. So they should have had ADIs on this list when they sent out that communication. So I fed that back, and the very nice person I spoke to yesterday did agree with me. It is strange they haven't updated the website to include ADIs if they're sending out notices saying ADIs now have to be compliant. So you can't see yourself on this list. So you think to yourself, I'm actually going to come out of this window and I'm going to not actually do that because I don't see myself in there. So is your, being, pig-headed about this, is the role on the list of regulated roles? No, I didn't see myself on that list. Is the role in any of these locations? No, I don't work in a school or hospital, nursery, daycare, hospice, care home, adult placement setting, residential care setting, or secure accommodation. I'm a driving instructor. I work in my car on the road. So again, I'm going to put no. Here is the bit that actually is why you should comply. So because I'm not giving advice here that you shouldn't comply. I'm giving advice that you will have to comply naturally with this scheme. It's just that at the moment they haven't made explicit when you go through the gateway that you should comply. But this is the bit that you should deem yourself a person who should register the scheme, because you do have contact on a regular basis with children or protected adults in this role. However, again, if you wanted to be curmudgeonly about this or pedantic about it, some people would say, okay, but what is the definition of a protected adult? I don't know what that term means. And I don't actually see myself as working with children. And the definition of what a child is can, or consent or all of those things, and what the legal definition of a child is can be somewhat, open to debate in different contexts. There are legal definitions, but some people who are teaching a 17-year-old, 18-year-old are not necessarily in the mindset of saying that they think they work with children. So yes, I would say you are working with children because they're under the age of 18 if you're teaching 17-year-olds, but a fleet trainer who has an ADI badge is going to question, well, should I actually register this scheme because I'm not seeing ADIs explicitly listed on the list? I know I am one, so I should actually have to do that if you're telling me, but it's not there for me and I don't work with children. However, it could be deemed you deal with protected adults. Again, another problem that I fed to Disclosure Scotland with their whole process here is you should be able to see on this page what is the definition of a child in this context and what is the definition of a protective adult, because unless you put those definitions there, people don't necessarily recognise that they work with children and protective adults. So that needs to be more explicitly clear and definitions be given here. The very nice gentleman on the end of the phone in the call centre yesterday said, well, we know what we mean by that. I'm like, but that's not clear enough for a member of the public essentially using your service, even if they are a regulated profession. The other conversation I had with them is, when you say regulated professionals need to be covered by the scheme, are you talking about anybody who holds a regulatory license from any regulator in the UK? And he said, no, 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 we actually have a list of regulated professions. We do not apply this scheme to every regulated professional in the UK or Scotland. We have our own select definition of what a regulated professional is. I'm like, but it could be open to interpretation that any regulated professional, like an ADI, so they should naturally sign up. But you're telling me it's actually your own list of regulated professionals and they don't appear on that. So again, they could check themselves out of this scenario. So I think you need to make that very clear. So you could actually here on this screen rationally and arguably click no, because if you're feeling that it's in as an ADI who doesn't work with children necessarily, those under 18, and you are somebody who doesn't recognise yourself or understand the term protected adult, you're actually going to go no here rather than yes. And obviously our advice would be you should really be ticking yes because you are being told by a regulator that you should comply with the scheme. But again, if you're going to be pedantic about it and you don't recognise yourself as working with protected adults and children, you're actually going to click no here. And this is the result you get if you click no. It's sorry, you get an extra window asking you whether you supervise or line manage anybody who's in a regulated role. And if you're a sole trader ADI in Scotland, no, you're not going to be supervising anybody. And even franchisees are not necessarily, and franchises are not necessarily supervising somebody in a regulated role by this very process. So you actually click no here, or many people would. That ends up in a result saying this role does not need PVG scheme membership, which is where the confusion has probably reigned from people who've already been through this process. I've got an email from DVSA telling me I've got to register this scheme. It's being enforced. Scottish Government has told me that now I have to be compliant. I've gone in all good faith to the website. I've gone through the checker. I can't see myself listed as a professional on any of the lists of the professions. I get that that's not an exhaustive list. However, I'm still confused. I'm going to go through your check-in process. I don't recognise myself in those roles, and I don't recognise I'm working with these vulnerable people. So I'm clicking no to everything, and your gateway checker is actually telling me I do not need to be a member of this scheme. If you obviously tick yes on is there contact with children protected adults in this role, it's going to shoot you off down a different path, which will result in saying, yes, you do need to actually register this scheme. So what I'm doing at the moment is I am asking Disclosure Scotland to make those changes to the website. Arguably, again, I will reiterate, you have a duty and a responsibility as a regulator or a regulatory body that if you want compliance, you should make compliance accessible and you should make it clear what people are expected to do. So when you sent that announcement out saying that from the 1st of April, you consider that driving instructors are covered by this scheme, you should have amended your website. It's a digital thing. You can update that list, and you do update that list as time goes on. So please, Disclosure Scotland, do cascade that up your chain of command, as I asked the person on the phone yesterday, and make those changes to the website so it's explicit that driving instructors do have to comply with this scheme. I've also asked DVSA to make that feedback because I think it's important that one regulator tells the other that if you want majority compliance, you have to make sure people understand what they have to comply with, and it's clear that they are a subject that meets the criteria for this scheme as well. So sorry about that for those who have nothing to do with this at all and aren't an ADI in Scotland. And sorry even for those of you who are in Scotland, because it's a very waffly explanation. But in showing you the screens there as I went through them, I hope that gives you some idea of the process that you have to go through to be compliant. And as I said, I will update you as soon as I hear from either Disclosure Scotland or DVSA that it has been made more explicitly clear on Disclosure Scotland's website, the PVG scheme website, that approved driving instructors do have to comply. My recommendation is I would make the moves to be compliant, because they will make those changes, and they do fit, you know, they have put out a notice warning you that you have to join this scheme, and not doing so, I'm not sure you're going to be able to use the excuse that you didn't see ADI on there and you don't think you're working with children or protective adults. So I would advise that you do try and comply with the scheme. However, I do very much take on board the feedback from members that it is confusing and they don't feel that they have to comply if it's not explicitly there that ADIs are to be covered by this scheme as well. So, but as I said, I'll keep you updated on that scheme. If you've got questions about it, please come and ask us on the help desk. We're finding our feet with this announcement as well, but as soon as we find out information, we will pass it on to our members. So that's it for now. That's your Friday update. Sorry it was, as usual, long and waffly, but you know me, I talk off the hoof, as it were, and I'm not normally as brief as I should be with things. But in that, hopefully there's some good kernels of information, some good nuggets there that you can take away and digest over the weekend. And in that vein, I hope you have a very restful weekend. Not so if you're obviously working, but I hope you have a very restful weekend when you can get a break. And I'll catch up with you next week on any news and further updates with any matters that affect our members. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.